I got 3 shifts a week, less than minimum wage. My friends will say I'm a reprobate. PRS pay me £3.68. 101 part-time jobs. Hello, you're listening to 101 part-time jobs. You like that jingle? Where I speak to bands that I love about their old jobs. I'm on a bit of a summer break at the moment, but this is one episode that was too good to hold. Tony Molina just released an amazing album, In the Fade. Tony Molina's music just has a weightlessness to it, sends me to a better place. So really excited to have him on. As I said, his new record, In the Fade, is out now. Here he is on 101 part-time jobs. Go well. Cheers. How old were you when you started the Ovens, and was it clashing with work? What were you doing at the time?
We were 17 when we started it. I think we were junior year of high school. A year after that is when I got my first job, which was at this movie theater in San Francisco, this place called the Vogue. To this day, that theater is like a huge part of my life. It's pretty much the main job I've ever really had. I don't work there anymore, but I pretty much worked there from like graduating high school to 2019. So like 2003 to 2019, pretty much.
Wow, that's a long period of time.
Yeah, for sure. And the theater was cool because it was it's this movie theater in San Francisco that our friends who also played in bands worked at. It was the cool place to go if you were in a band and stuff. And it was cool because it's like you could work and then you're working with like-minded people. I met many of my best friends there over the years, and then you can go on tour, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you needed to, and you didn't really have to worry about getting fired. I actually lucked out, I think, you know what I mean? Like I didn't have to get a job at the mall and get treated like shit by a bunch of people, and then, you know, have to quit and then fucking go on tour and then come back and then look for another shitty job. I kind of always had the theater to come back to, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Almost everyone I know who is in like a grounded and like good and, you know, healthy kind of position being an artist, almost all of them have had like sort of friends or mentors or some kind of shamanic figure in their life where they can, you know, get advice from and bounce shit off. Did working at Vogue and hanging out with your new friends there, did they kind of offer that sort of role?
I mean, that place kind of shaped my life because I met the guitar player of the Ovens there. My first ever shift was with him. He wasn't the original guitar player of the band. We'd had a couple guys that came in and it didn't work out. And but then when he joined, it was like we became immediate friends on my first day of work, October 2003. I think the movie we were showing was Lost in Translation, the movie with Bill Murray. Yeah. And so it was way back then, and like that first day we immediately became like really good close friends. We liked all the same. He was a huge Melvins fan, and I was a huge Melvins fan. And then shortly after he joined the band, and you know, to this day he's still in that band.
I've got a big wide smile on my face because that's good. That's the good shit. Finding a good friend in life.
Oh yeah, for sure. The theater was like that, you know, like a lot of bands kind of formed there, and it just created a place where a lot of the sort of our music community in the Bay Area, and especially San Francisco, you know, there was tons of like, it's funny to do this podcast because all this stuff is kind of coming for full circle lately, because over the pandemic, I made a compilation mixtape just because I was bored. It was during lockdown, you know, and I made a compilation mixtape of 20 years of Vogue bands.
Great.
Yeah. And I put out this tape, and then we actually had a show at the Vogue.
Quality.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah, and there's still bands. There's younger bands working there now too. So it's still that way, and it's still like a huge part of my life, really, the Vogue, you know?
You know, it's funny in England, and I think in Australia and New Zealand, they have these kind of government schemes to, you know, nurture bands and to, you know, so obviously a lot of it is financial, but I think a big part of it is a community. And that is just the most punk rock thing, is making your own one of those. That's a pretty rare thing.
Yeah. I mean, our boss, this guy, Herb Kaufman, he was older, but he had grown up in like the early 80s, and he used to go see Swans and old Sonic Youth, like confusing the Sex era Sonic Youth, and I think he saw Black Flag once, and he would talk about the '80s and stuff. So he was like minded, even though he was way older. And I think he felt comfortable hiring like all these people that were just in local bands because he related to us, and he was a huge part of of the whole thing. He was the guy who was allowing us to go on tour. He's like, I'll cover your shifts while you're gone. You know what I mean? That kind of shit. And so it was cool to yeah, it's always felt very family oriented there,
Yeah.
at the Vogue. Yeah. And there's all kinds of bands, man, like hella hardcore. There's metal bands, like just all across the board, just every kind of thing. We have my friend Carson, he's a rapper. There was, it was just pretty like, all across the board with kind of any kind of underground guitar music. Pretty much there was that at the Vogue for sure.
It's cool that I think growing up playing in bands, you do get a lot of reactions from people that, maybe are slightly condescending towards you, or
Yeah.
maybe, throwaway. But the reality of it is that if you're in a band, chances are you're quite well organized. You're a self-starter, or whatever phrase you could put on your CV, your resume.
Well, I mean, the thing about us is that, like, we were raised by the Bay Area underground DIY scene. And so we had really good teachers from when we were kids, and I think we're just products of that. We started when we were really young, and we kind of were able to navigate how to do bands and put out records and things like that at a really young age because we had the best mentors, older, people that, I mean, these are people that are like legends in my book, like someone like Jeff Robinson from Capitalist Casualties, who ran 6 Weeks Records. He was a huge guy in our life, like Dan Lactose, who was in the band Spaz. We
Yeah.
had all these mentors when we were kids. So it was kind of like we came up good. You know what I mean? Like we were lucky. We were super lucky.
That's great that those older people will speak to younger people like their own age.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. And we experienced that when we were 16. Like all of a sudden, we were friends with all the guys from Spaz and Agents of Satan and all these bands that we kind of had just discovered that we like couldn't believe. And it was a huge, I come from this area called the West Bay, and it's not totally known for music and stuff like that. But the bands that came out of it are like legendary, and like anyone who knows about it like knows about it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like getting to kind of meet your favorite bands and then become friends when you're still a kid was like super huge, super eye-opening. You're like, wow, like this shit is possible to do.
I think most musicians start off not knowing how to do anything apart from write songs in their most basic form. Forget about releasing records or recording. I mean, that's stuff that you learn along the way. And in a way, you kind of have to get lucky for the people that you meet and the friends that you make that you either learn from or learn with.
Yeah, I mean, I still look up to my heroes, and I'm friends with these people now, and we've been friends for like 20 years. I still look up to them as my heroes, and I still, if I make a record, I send it to them. I still have that nervousness I had when I was 16, giving them my first hardcore bands demo. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm closer to 40 than anything else now, but I still have that little kid nervousness when I talk to my OGs. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. That's
yeah.
the good stuff. That's the
Yeah.
great stuff. A P45 and a bank condemned. The booking agent screening our calls again. Still coughing up for those PCNs. 101 part-time jobs.
Being from the West Bay, it was kind of like you're kind of on your own out there. The bands from the West Bay tend to not get as much props as a lot of other bands from other areas of the Bay Area have over the years. The East Bay is like famous, like the East Bay is hugely famous for its punk scene, its hardcore scene, and its metal scene. I mean, the East Bay invented thrash in the 80s, thrash metal and, Lookout Records, Gilman, all that stuff. Really legendary stuff that kind of changed the world. And so the West Bay was always kind of overlooked. So we knew we were kind of out on our own a little bit. I remember in the early Ovens days, it was really tough on us because we were like a straight pop band and we had all these ideas that weren't necessarily being celebrated or talked about at all in the hardcore scene we came from. And so we were actually really shy and nervous about it. And we purposely kept ovens like kind of away from the hardcore scene we knew. Even though these people were like our friends and like, no, like, you know, we're still kids. But we were nervous about playing pop because because we were playing in hardcore bands. But then by the time ovens started really, really being a thing and we had multiple albums that we were recording, eventually like all the old hardcore people that we knew were like, dude, this is great. And they loved it and they welcomed it with open arms. But it was like, it was years of kind of being scared to be like exposed in that way. Like, oh, Bo and Tony from Dystrophy, like they're playing some Weezer shit now or something. You know, it was like my worst nightmare. It was my worst nightmare to think that someone would be talking about that, you know, like someone I respected. That never happened. Like they were always just like, dude, Tony and Bo's new band, they're great. You know,
those heads must have kind of enjoyed Teenage Fan Club and pastel stuff and Vaselines and
so that stuff was like, I got into that stuff in high school, but as far as the with the UK pop stuff, that stuff changed my life as a kid because I always thought that the DIY underground network was like kind of, you know, just hardcore and metal and just like brutal shit, you know, and it was cool to get into it at that time because here we had like Slumberland Records and it was, you know what I mean? And Slumberland in a lot of ways is kind of like the sort of West Coast Sarah kind of thing. You know what I mean?
The indie pop label from Bristol.
Yeah. And so I was discovering all the Slumberland bands at that age too. I was like 17. I just like discovered the underground pop community that totally changed my life because I was like, cool, it could still be DIY, it could still be underground, but it's like pop. It doesn't have to be like super crazy metal and stuff. And there was other bands like too. There's like the Bananas from Sacramento. They like were really instrumental during that time. Yeah.
With all those bands around, you know, people surviving and putting music as a priority and still having some kind of, you know, structure in their lives. How did you see that stuff? Where were you with that? Were some bands kind of going for it and living kind of on friends' floors, and other people had regular jobs they were able to hold down somehow?
Yeah, like a lot of my best friends, like a lot of the Vogue people, like they would just tour constantly, and they were super DIY. They were going for it as far as just wanting to tour as much as possible, but I don't think they were really flirting with any type of success. Like I don't really think they were wanting to go to the next level, get signed to a label, and do that whole thing. Like, you know, but some of our friends got some taste of it back in those days. A Vogue band, which is also features, well, it's like it features the guitar player of the Ovens, AK, who I was talking about earlier. His band, the Trainwreck Riders, they were a DIY band who came up with all of us at the same time, and they actually got signed to Alive Records, which was like the Black Keys label or whatever. And so they got to do, yeah. And we had a friends band in the city called Two Gallants, and they got kind of famous. And so it was like we saw that stuff kind of happening. We're like, damn, like friends of ours are like getting kind of big or whatever. It was kind of exciting to see because I was totally on the outside of it because we were just so strictly DIY and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know?
Did that bring any kind of like problems or like conflicts or, you know, that kind of, you know, maybe confusion being DIY, but sort of having, you know, seeing that happen and being like, well, you know, I want to play music. You want to play music.
It wasn't any confusion. We were like happy for everyone. And I mean, these dudes weren't playing like they weren't playing grindcore or anything like that. So I didn't really necessarily like assign them with needing, you know what I mean? Like I didn't have any issue with people trying to moving to the next step and like maybe becoming like big or like signed or whatever those things meant. I just thought it was exciting. It was like I was happy for my friends, you know?
Yeah.
If they were playing super underground grindcore and shit like that, it'd be like it wouldn't make any sense for them to like to go to that level. But these bands were like really good like pop songwriting bands. Like they absolutely should have went to whatever next level was available to them. And I knew that then, you know, I didn't have any issue with it. I mean, to me, when I was a kid, I was like, dude, Slumberland is the coolest label in the world. Like, I'll never know any of those people. Like, I'll never be able to put out a record on that label because it's just the coolest thing in the world. And it was definitely a step above where we were coming from with our little, you know, basement show DIY shit that we were doing. And, but sure enough, dude, like I was on Slumberland for hell of years.
And did you realize that those people aren't, no different to you and your friends?
They're exactly the same. They're exactly the same. I mean, Mike Schulman, who runs Slumberland, he grew up going to hardcore shows in DC. You know what I mean? So the sort of nervousness of coming from hardcore and getting into pop, it was just easy because it's just like, dude, I grew up seeing all those bands. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, he saw most of them. He never saw Void. He told me he never saw Void, and that's like a big regret he has, because it's like, everyone would have liked to see Void, I mean, so it was like, but Slumberland was great for that, because you could still kind of be from your underground roots and stuff, but then having a record out with them, it's like it has more reach distribution wise, and it'll get to other types of people outside of those circles. But you're not really selling out, and you're not really compromising your ethics or anything like that. You know what I mean? I think I got really lucky out here, but I think the Bay Area is kind of famous for that and being like a warm, nice place, I think.
Right.
So I feel like and me living here my whole life, it's like all I know. You know what I mean? There's definitely people here that are like older heads that are like OGs that are mean as fuck and bitter and stuff like that. That's part of it.
Yeah.
It's like I respect the OGs so much that I just kind of respect where they're coming from, like either way. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and for me, like I was always so self-conscious about anything I did musically that I always expected the OGs to clown me and fucking say it was garbage or whatever like that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I never expected anyone to like it or like be like, let me put out your next record or anything. I never thought anything like that would happen.
I feel that. There's a band that I loved growing up, and they just released 2 records, and I think they heard Kid Dynamite, and they started this band called The Steel, and they're just the best thing ever. And they're a bit older, and I kind of see them every now and once again around town, and I don't really know them, but I've never really spoken to them. I kind of like appreciate that kind of distance that you have with your favorite band, who are from your town.
Yeah, for sure. I was always nervous to talk to the bands I looked up to. I was always like scared to meet them and stuff. I remember one time, well, this is crazy in itself. My favorite band of all time, besides the Beatles, probably is the Fastbacks from Seattle.
Okay.
And my friends that, again, DIY people, they're from up in Washington. They're in this band called the Holy Ghost Revival. And from Bainbridge Island, Washington. They actually lived in London for a while, and they got like signed to a label out there. But anyways, those guys, they introduced me to Kurt Bloch from the Fastbacks in the Ovens days, and we recorded our second record with him. And he's been my friend since we were like, since I was like 20 years old. About that, like, I remember one time I went and saw a Fastbacks reunion show in the city, and it was with the Muffs. And I was with Kurt. I was with Kurt Bloch, and he goes, "Hey man, you want to meet Kim?" And I was too nervous to meet Kim because I'd been obsessed with the Muffs since I was like 4. Like some of my first shows were the Muffs. Like when I was like 14. And and I dude, I was a Muffs fit. Like I would go see the Muffs since I was 14 up until she passed away. Damn. It was just a big part of my life, and that's a big like influence too. But I remember just being too nervous to say hello that night. I'm like that.
I mean, releasing In the Fade, and we've just got like a few more minutes before this meeting self explodes or whatever. Zoom meetings as they are. But how do you reflect on your life in music and being able to prioritize writing songs and releasing records right now, today? How do you sum it up for yourself?
I always set out to be a lifer, because all my heroes that I looked up to weren't like super famous people, but they were people that consistently great records for like 20, 30 years. And we're pretty normal people. Like I said, dude, we just always had like mentors and stuff.
Yeah.
And it steered us the right way. It steered us in the right direction. And I think it's like, so now I'm at my 20-year mark with having made these records for 20 years. And I'm like, dude, I'm like pretty happy with the way it all came out. Consistency was important, and like not doing too much and like not burning yourself out and things like that. And, so I think, and I'm like pretty happy with it,
That's a really important point, actually, that, I haven't really talked too much about on this podcast, and I've done like 160 episodes. No one's really talked too much about burning out?
Yeah, well, it's people get caught up in their own hype sometimes, and then they burn themselves out with touring a bunch.
Oh, I lost you again. Sorry, you were just saying about, is it always about the next record for you?
I mean, yeah, I think that's a good mentality to have. If you're always thinking about the next one, you're not. See, because it's like I never really wanted to enjoy the fruits of the labor. I always just wanted to keep moving.
Right. Right.
Yeah, like I always wanted to, like, it never made sense to me to like tour. I have done this and it was a bad decision. That's why I don't tour anymore. But like I never wanted to like tour one record to death. I was like, nah, I'd rather like stay home and make 3 records,
Yeah. There's a lot more to enjoy there, perhaps, or to share and to experience together, which I guess it sounds like you're sounding like a gig. A gig is something to enjoy together, but a record, when you can enjoy something in your bedroom on a Sunday night with your headphones on, that's a pretty special moment for everyone.
I prefer doing that over than going to gigs myself, unless it's like Hendrix or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for real. Well, Tony, thank you so much for being up for doing this. Thank you for those stories.
Oh, for sure. I had a blast talking to you. Seriously.
That's sick. I mean, the Vogue tape, is that still available?
Yeah. But you know what? It's weirdly not available online yet. But I think we're gonna figure out a way to get some copies out there into the internet kind of universe so people can order it and get it shipped. And I'll definitely keep you posted on all that.
Tony, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Of course, man. You too. Bye.
See you then. So there was Tony Molina on 101 Part-Time Jobs. Back properly in October, I think. There might be a couple of episodes before then. Cheers for listening. Here's Sparrer.
I've been working all day for me mate on the side, running around like a blue-ass fly. I've been working all day for me mate. Every bleeding minute I've been on the go, up and down the ladder like a fiddler's elbow. I've been working all day for me mate.
This is a Mighty Moon Media podcast.